Yo, what's up? So it's nearly rookie season. Picks are in fashion, and in the year of rookie season 2023, they have been for a minute. So let's answer some of those questions today. How likely are you to get a Corey Davis? How likely are you to get a Justin Jefferson? What happens with a first-round pick on average?
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once.
So, a little while ago, I put out this tweet asking basically that question. How many times or how often or percentage of players do you think end up producing at least one, just one, but bare minimum, startable fantasy season within their first 3 years from an average rookie class? Most people suspect that around half the class is going to at least produce, or at least a first round, at least one fantasy relevant season. Almost insignificant point, but slightly important, which is just about my favorite kind of point. Describing the past isn't the same as predicting the future. I'm not going to tell you this is right or wrong, getting it right or wrong. In the same way, I'm not going to tell you this predicts that certain players at certain positions will hit at a certain rate. It doesn't. It describes it, which is useful information, but a very different thing from, and therefore I know that all running backs are great, or whatever. Next. So first, let's look at the overall hit rate of positions and first round, second round, and third round players in an average rookie draft since 2014. Overall points. 14, a rookie pick in the first round, a top 12 player in any given class in August, hits for about 54% of the time if you count it as just having one startable season by their third career year. It's 65% of the time at running back, 42% of the time at wide receiver, so significantly less, and then 66% of the time at tight end. So that 65% hit rate for running backs is hot. It looks tempting, right? But remember, we're only talking about top 24 seasons, something Damian Harris once cleared before this year. And at tight end, we're talking about top 12. Evan Ingram hit that mark. So did David Njoku before 2022. The other thing I'll point out is that tight end sample is relatively small. Usefully enough, the hit rates stay about the same if you convert this not just to overall finishes, but points per game finishes. So a player that may have had a shortened season or only did it over a shorter period of time, like Brandon Ayuk, about 65% of running backs hit on a points per game basis inside the top 24, 44% of wide receivers, 66% of tight ends, and about 50% for quarterbacks, which I think I forgot to mention on the overall season, but you saw it on the table, so it's fine. But that's not all we can do, because the first 6 picks are different than the second 6 picks. There's a difference between an early first round pick and a late first round pick. Since 2014, a top 6 pick has netted one bare minimum fantasy relevant season from any of the positions about 64% of the time. About 10% more effective than if we just looked at the overall round in the previous table. So it is better to have a top 6 pick, even if we're not being too specific about it. 69% of the running backs drafted in the first 6 picks hit, 55% of the wide receivers drafted in the first 6 picks hit since 2014, 100% of the tight ends. But again, that's like a sample of 1. And it was Evan Ingram. The second half of the first round, however, is equally interesting. If you'll notice, the picks 7 to 12 at the wide receiver position are hitting at about a 39% rate, which is about the same as a generic first in the previous tables. So if you have a back-end first, the wide receiver position is still hitting about as hard in terms of wide receivers drafted there that eventually hit, according to ADP, for at least one startable fantasy season. I find that interesting, and it's going to come up later again, so maybe put a pin in it. An early second round pick hits about 33% of the time for having a fantasy relevant season, but the back end of the second round hits only 22% of the time. There's a significant drop off from the early second round to the late second round. Third round, we basically see hit rates drop into the toilet. There's about back-end third-round picks have been better for wide receiver, and early third-round picks have been better for running back. Again, not predictive, that's just what's happened previously. First-round running backs are still hit, at a higher rate than wide receivers in the early first and in the later first, which is interesting because you do hear a lot of talk.
Keyshawn Vaughn sucks.
They're hitting at a higher rate, and that made me really interesting to find out why. The answer actually comes when you dig into the actual classes, and you note that some of those late first round running back hits, picks 6 to 12, aren't really that late, especially when you consider them in the context of the class. So here they are. You'll notice that some of these late round running backs, later first round running backs, aren't really later first round running backs. Derrick Henry fell because of concern of the nature of his running back style, but he was also drafted relatively high considering the thickness of his 2016 class, or at least how it was considered at the time. Alvin Kamara was drafted 6th overall, so barely in that second half, and I don't think it's fair to rate him as a 10th, 11th, 12th round pick like Keyshawn Vaughn and James Cook, when both were being drafted 6th and 7th overall. Kareem Hunt fell a little later to 8th overall, but again, it's not a 10th, 11th, 12th round pick like Keyshawn Vaughn and James Cooks were, and some of the other misses that probably come to mind when you think about late round running back. But still, Nick Chubb is also on this list, notice. And again, he's drafted 7th overall. When we look at the running backs who have hit outside of those first 6 picks, I mean, even Kylos Hyde was 6th overall, and Jeremy Hill got held behind Gio Bernard, who was a better running back. So it's true that running backs hit at a higher rate, and late round running backs continue to hit at a higher rate than wide receivers, but if we dig in just a little bit, we see that late category isn't quite fair in the table I made. So that's basically what you can expect for a rookie class. On average,
2023 is built different.
Thank you, Strange Man. 2023 is a class that we've been hyping up for 2 years. Not me. So, let's look at classes that are built different. That we know were built different, even if we didn't necessarily know it in advance. Let's pretend we always know, because the Devi community is getting sharper and sharper. So let's look at 2014. In 2014, out of all players drafted in the first round, as we're defining it, 66% of them hit for at least a bare minimum of startability in fantasy football. That's 11% more than the average draft class I was just talking about, from 55% to 66%. It is built a little different when you dig into an individual class. You can't expect that average to tell you much about a next class when we know more about that class than the average could ever possibly tell us. 85% of wide receivers drafted in the first round in 2014 hit our bare minimum standards and actually just blew them away based on just whether they're startable or not. That's twice as often as the average. Remember, the average was 44% of wide receivers hitting on a generic first round pick. This is 85% generic first round pick in 2024. You're basically guaranteed a hit if you drafted a wide receiver through the top 12 in ADP. Running back is also a little different. It hit 50% of the time. 50% of the running backs drafted in the first round of 2014 actually broke out for a bare minimum standard of usability. That's 15% less. 2014 was quintessentially divided between wide receivers and running backs, and the wide receivers are the ones that you wanted. So that's a built different class. I think that's well known. 2017 wasn't just a running back class. It's often framed as that because the running backs that came from that class are still clobbering all of fantasy football. In fact, we keep finding new 2017 running backs who are really good. Hello, Jamal Williams, for example, this year. But there are other good players in that class pretty much at all positions. 2017 is kind of off the charts. In 2017, running backs hit for 85% of the time within the first round, like wide receivers in 2014, interestingly enough. That's 20% more than their average. And 0% of wide receivers drafted in the first round hit for our bare minimum standards. But bear in mind, only 2 wide receivers were drafted, and that was Corey Davis, still painful, and John Ross. Thank you, Cincinnati. But interesting enough about 2017, because it wasn't just a running back class, 66% of the wide receivers drafted in the second round actually hit our bare minimum standards of having a usable season within their first 3 career years. Despite this being the thickest class ever, really, at any position, especially when you consider the cross-positional hits. And look weird, does anything not strike you? Like, Leonard Fournette was good, but he was drafted number 1 overall, above Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, both of them have produced more fantasy relevant seasons over the long haul. can we really say that class was built different, therefore that one-on-one had more value? That raises some interesting questions to me. Good players come out every year, like really good players. The best players can be found in any single rookie draft class, and there will be some of the best players from every rookie draft class. I'm very confident in saying that, whether it's Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson. There will be good players. They come at different spots, very interestingly. We do an okay job, pretty good, over 50% of the time, and actually ranking the top 12 players in terms of their usability for fantasy football or having a usable season. Of course, there's no real way of me to say how often we're going to get the best rookie or the best running back or the best wide receiver versus the ADP. You can rank a class based on their average points per game. Up to this point, you wouldn't even have to use the first 3 years and actually get a fairly decent single number of whether a player was the best wide receiver or running back to draft. And we could use... I'm going to end up making another table, aren't I? Okay. Okay, so that's fairly wild, actually. And again, descriptive, not predictive. But what I did is I ranked players based on their average points per game. So it's a much more accurate list of who was the best wide receiver to draft and the best running back to draft, and how deeply were they drafted. And the results, well, running back hits so much more consistently at wide receiver, it's basically night and day. The running back drafted number 1 overall has ended up being the number 1 overall running back from that class through the first 3 years, to be fair, and 62% of the time. At wide receiver, it's 12%. Essentially, since 2014, we've gotten one rookie wide receiver 1 accurate, Jamar Chase. And to be fair, that was easy. We should have got that one right. So if you look at the running back ones overall, remember they're ranked by their points per game relative to their draft class. Because again, some classes are built differently. So Christian McCaffrey's average points per game is 22.7. That's not the same as Devontae Freeman's 13.8 points per game. But it does mean that Devontae Freeman averaged a higher points per game than every other rookie you could have drafted in that rookie class according to ADP. Notice that only 3 of them weren't drafted as the number 1 running back overall. That's where that 62% hit rate's coming from. Like, our running back ones hit as the points per game running back ones, incredibly high percentage, remember? On the other hand, look at wide receiver. This is the highest points per game player from each rookie class at the wide receiver position and their rookie ADP relative to the position. So Odell Beckham was the 8th rookie wide receiver off the board in 2014 in ADP. The 8th. Stephon Diggs was the only second-round player on this list, but he was drafted 16th overall, and he is the wide receiver you wanted to draft in 2015. Michael Thomas was the 5th wide receiver off the board in that year in ADP. So this table isn't unfair. We are particularly bad at ranking which is the best rookie wide receiver to draft. Not that we're not hitting at it. We're not hitting at too disproportional a rate when you're talking about usable seasons. But if you want to know if you're more likely to be drafting the running back 1 per ADP or the wide receiver 1 per ADP, it's the running back. We're bad at wide receivers when you're comparing outright who was the best player to draft. So what's the extra conclusion we can reach there from the other generic ones I can give? Without using it as predictive, because individual player analysis matter, but it is fair to say, without using this as a predictive stat, just a descriptive stat, we get more wrong at wide receiver more often than any other position. It's useless to say draft running backs or draft wide receivers early because they have a greater hit rate, because it is largely class dependent. It's useless to say draft wide receivers early and then end up taking Corey Davis in 2017 when pretty much everyone else at the wide receiver and running back position after that was a hit. So the draft class itself matters a lot more than these hit rates, but it does give you, I think it does give us a fair understanding of what we're trading into when we're just talking about generic first round pick. Alright, that's how often we're successful and some of the takeaways I can glean just from looking at rookie ADP to final finishes. Hope you found it interesting, somewhat useful, or a decent answer to the question I posed on Twitter. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe if you would be so kind, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.